I am so excited to share today's episode. I sat down with a friend of mine who came home early from her mission due to mental health, and we have a beautiful discussion about overcoming feelings of guilt, shame, and deep despair. Not everyone's trial is coming home early from their mission, but no matter what your current trial is, I know that you will be inspired and feel lifted after hearing Beth's story. Welcome to Blonde Apologist. Welcome to a new episode of Blonde Apologist. I have with me my friend Beth Erickson. Should I use your full name or just Beth?
It doesn't matter. I don't really care.
Today's episode, we are talking about coming home early from your mission. And I was talking to Beth about this before we started recording. I know that everyone who has experienced this has a different story. And there's a multitude of reasons why people come home early. And we won't be able to cover or maybe meet every single one of those stories. But I think a lot of people have similar feelings of maybe guilt, disappointment, and we hope that today's episode we can talk about this in a way that can help people who have experienced this feel more encouragement and better understand how your Heavenly Father feels about you, and also help other members who are surrounded by people who have come home early know how to talk to them and appropriately approach them so that we can help people, because this is, no matter what, it's a trial. No matter what your experience with it is. So I'm grateful for Beth that she's willing to be vulnerable and come on and chat with me about this. How are you feeling?
I'm good. For me, it's been 8 years since that happened. So yeah. I think it's easier to talk about now than it used to be, but it definitely is still something I think about often and end up talking about frequently. So
naturally, you're probably in a better place right now to talk about it than we were 8 years ago. Yeah. And so from what you have learned, you can share that wisdom with the listeners today. I would love to hear about your experience in making the decision to go on a mission.
So I definitely didn't always want to go. My mom served a mission and talked about it frequently. And so I think she always encouraged, I knew that a mission is a good option and that it could be a very positive experience. But I mean, especially when I was little, I just was going to die if I was going to be 21 and not married.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Until you get to college and you're like, wait a minute, this is not actually very old. So when the age changed, obviously tons and tons more people started to go, including two of my sisters. And so that definitely got me thinking about it more. But something I appreciated that my mom talked about frequently was that you really shouldn't go on a mission unless you know that you're supposed to be there. And so I didn't want to just go because everyone else was going.
Yeah.
And because, really, it hadn't been something that I always wanted to do like it was for other people. But I wanted to know one way or the other. I didn't like kind of living in that limbo. And so it was my senior year when all of my, guy friends were getting their mission calls that I really was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I was praying about it and going to the temple and kind of doing everything that I could to figure out what was right for me. But then it ended up being at like a Morningside where Elder Christofferson was there, and someone had asked that question about girls going on a mission, and he said basically, it's great if you go, it's great if you don't. That's the thing for women. So in that moment, I think I just kind of decided to myself, okay, I'm going to go. And that's when I felt like I got confirmation that was the right choice for me. Yeah, so it was very much my decision, but I knew that was the right decision for me.
Yeah. And do you still feel that way?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so you get on your mission. What are your thoughts? Brand new, Sister Maury.
It's funny because you think about the MTC and a lot of it was a lot of fun, but I think, pretty much from early on, I can look back in my journal and realize that I was anxious and probably starting to get depressed very early on. So I think the feelings of inadequacy and the worry that I wasn't a good enough missionary, that I wasn't learning the language fast enough, all of those insecurities came pretty early on. So
where did you get called? That's important probably
Portugal. So the Portugal mission. And that was actually part of what made coming home really hard, was that I had a lot of family members that served in Portugal. My sister-in-law served there, two of my stepbrothers, my aunt. And so there were a lot of people in my family that really felt strongly and loved Portugal. And so that obviously I wanted to as well. And I did, but that made it harder to come home, was kind of that fear of, they all loved it. And here I am wanting to go home. But yeah, so in the MTC, I had a great companion. I had a great district and great teachers. But it was definitely hard from the get-go. And it's funny because it's hard being in Provo because it's a block away from where we lived. So
it's so true.
It's so...
I could see where we lived, the building we lived in from the MTC. And
we walked past it.
Ill.
Yeah.
Or when you'd go to the temple.
Yeah, running. I was like, man, I was running past this, 3 months ago, and now I can't leave this little square.
And I had my freedom then.
Yeah.
I remember that.
So that was hard. And I definitely think I was starting to struggle in the MTC. I remembered a time where I, the laundry closet where they kept all the extra sheets and stuff.
Yeah.
I went in there one night and just cried for probably an hour. And now that I look back, that was probably a panic attack, but I didn't know what that was at the time. So I just thought that it was
because you hadn't experienced anxiety before your mission.
I probably not to the extent. Looking back on my life, I definitely think I've probably struggled with depression the majority of my life, but I didn't know it. I knew that I got sad frequently, and I think there were a couple times where I wondered if maybe I was depressed, but not enough that I ever really did anything about it. And so, everyone talks about how a mission is kind of a pressure cooker for a lot of issues. And so, that definitely was what it was for me. So, it's such an intense environment, and it's so easy to doubt yourself and feel insecure, especially if you're already a perfectionist, that I think it kind of really highlights a lot of those fears and insecurities. And so I think it really just brought that anxiety and depression that I already had really to a head.
That is, I think, an experience that everyone has a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's maybe an issue with the perfectionist culture of our faith a little bit. And I hope that this whole podcast, that is something that we can maybe say, let's take the pressure off.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to look a certain way for you to be worthy or for it to be right.
Did you ever read I think they were just firesides, but then they ended up kind of getting printed and shared. But it's the Fourth Missionary.
Yes, I feel like I did. That title sounds familiar, but I don't remember at all what it's about.
So it talks about there are 4 different types of missionaries. The first missionary is the disobedient missionary that does damage to his area and his, the mission because he's selfish and disobedient and gets sent home early. And so, and he's not changed. Then the second missionary kind of is bad, but not bad enough to be sent home. So doesn't
not
really
hastening the work, but he's there.
But so he's kind of a detriment to the mission and to the area, but not bad enough to go home. So he's not changed as a person. Then you have the third missionary who kind of does everything right and helps the area and the mission, but he doesn't have his heart in it. So he's changed, but it's not quite there. And then the fourth missionary, the missionary that lays it all on the altar to the Lord and gives it all and puts all of those, previous desires, loves, whatever from his previous life aside and focuses on the Lord. And so then, it's a great blessing to the mission, to the people, and then comes home a changed person. And honestly, that was a talk that my mission president gave to all of us to read when we got into the field. And I can see what that talk is trying to say. It's trying to say, give it your all, put your heart into it. But that idea drove me crazy. And I think was at the root of my issues, because I felt like, I feel like just by going on a mission, you're already consecrating yourself, right?
Yeah.
You're putting behind. I remember learning at BYU that, that period of your life, that your late teens, early 20s, is typically the most selfish time of your life, because you're living away from home and your life is really all about you. It's your education, you're getting your independence. And so that's typically when people are the most selfish. And so then if you think about, for missionaries, you do literally the opposite. Literally. You are giving up everything, your family, your friends, your life, all the fun that you could be having and going and serving the Lord. And so that in and of itself means that you are consecrating yourself. But I felt like, I think to me, being consecrated meant I couldn't even really think about my family. I couldn't miss them. I shouldn't even be thinking about them at all. I shouldn't be thinking about my friends. I shouldn't be thinking about, the hobbies that I missed or enjoyed beforehand.
Then you create guilt.
Yeah.
Because
and so,
those are inevitable.
Well, yeah. And so I think that was my problem, was that I sat there and I thought, well, I don't exist without all of these things. I can't not think about these things. And so, this Sister Maury that I'm supposed to be I can't be her. She doesn't exist because, there's no way I can put that all behind me.
Everything behind me, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think I felt like I couldn't be Beth and Sister Maury at the same time.
Yeah, interesting. I would make the argument there's not a wrong reason to go on a mission.
Maybe if you're going to get a car. Like if your parents are going to get you a car or that kind of a thing.
Even if you're going for ulterior motives, you're still like you said, you're still sacrificing so much. Yep. And so I don't think we need to paint it as there's these good missionaries and then there's bad missionaries. I think Heavenly Father obviously loves every single missionary the same, but I think maybe there are some that he trusts more than others, dependent on their
trust is a good word.
On their ability to listen to his promptings and be obedient.
And I remember when I talked to my mom, and she was kind of like, Beth, what's going on? And I was like, I'm not consecrated. I'm supposed to be this consecrated missionary and I can't do it. And she was like, Bethany, we're all just trying. That's the process of a lifetime, to be able to put everything behind. And so that really was an aha moment for me, because I was like, oh, I don't have to achieve this, consecration that, I don't know, Jesus has or something like that.
So you were just being so hard on yourself because you didn't think you were perfect.
Yeah, pretty much.
At being a missionary.
Well, yeah, I thought I was bad because I was thinking about home, and I was thinking about, when I played tennis or making cookies or, the people I went on dates with, so I felt guilty for missing those things and for wanting to talk about those things. And I felt like because I was still holding on so tightly to those, it meant that I wasn't putting everything aside.
Interesting. Okay, so your mom gives you this advice. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to consecrate. That's not what it looks like.
Yeah.
And it opened your perspective, but where did you go from there?
Well, that was after. That was after I came home.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I think, so my mom came to Portugal to get me. So when you are going home for mental health reasons, they either have someone, like a family member, come to the mission. I think it's that they don't want you to travel alone.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
They have someone either come to you or they have someone go home with you. So for me, it was that my mom came to Portugal, which was actually a great experience for me, because then my last memories of Portugal, I was with my mom. And so, and I was able to show her around Porto. And
how long had you been on the mission?
5 months.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I was at the end of my third transfer. So it was when she came to Portugal, when she kind of was like, tell me, we had already talked. And so she knew kind of what was going on. But, she was like, tell me what is going on. And it was then that she said that. And I kind of was like, oh, well, that would have been nice to know 4 months ago. That would have been nice to realize.
Yes.
And so that's whenever I talk to people that are going on missions or are struggling at the beginning of their mission, I always say that.
Make sure.
You do not have to be perfect. What you are doing is in and of itself a huge sacrifice. And so there is no perfect cookie cutter consecrated missionary. They don't exist.
No.
And the Lord didn't call you to become this
robot.
Yeah. And that's, I think that's kind of what I started to feel like, was that all good missionaries looked a certain way. And I didn't feel like the Lord wanted Bethany. He wanted this other person. And so, so that's what I try to remind people, that the Lord called you. For your experience. Yeah. He wants you. And so he doesn't want you to become your trainer. He doesn't want you to become, elder or sister so-and-so. He wants you to bring you to the table, to bring your experiences. And that's what's going to relate to people.
That's really good.
Yeah.
So when you're on the mission, at what point did you think okay, I think the next step is for me to go home?
Oh man. I feel like for me, it all happened at the very end. I think it was a lot of this pressure and these feelings had been building and building and building. And so I think in the back of my mind, I may have kind of been like, man, it would be so much easier to be home. I can't imagine being here for
18 months.
Yeah, 18 months. And so, but it wasn't until I feel like I reached a breaking point, which was probably like maybe mid-November, that I really was kind of like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And so after that, again, it all kind of broke. And after that, everything just kind of fell apart.
It happened so fast.
Yeah. So,
did you talk to your companion about it first or reach out to your mission president?
Yeah, I talked to my companion. And so I think she obviously knew that I was having a hard time to some degree. But I think for me, like, it was hard to know what is normal struggling, because everyone has a hard time at the beginning of the mission. So
absolutely,
it's hard to know what is normal levels of stress and what is abnormal. Mm-hmm. What's abnormal homesickness and depression about being there, and anxiety. And I think what should have been the clue to me was that it wasn't getting any better. Even when I was learning more, becoming more comfortable with the area, things like that, those feelings didn't go away. If anything, they just grew. And so, honestly, my companion and I got along so well, and she was wonderful. We served the whole time together. So we were together for all 3 transfers, which is a long time with a person. I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I don't think I ever had a companion for that long.
I remember, what they dreamed about. Every single thing about them. And so one night it was one of the first times that we ever kind of snapped at each other. And that, I think, to me was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And it wasn't anything that she said or anything that she did, but that kind of triggered my emotional response. And I remember it was the next day that we were out going to an appointment, and I was like walking behind her as we walked there, and the whole way I was just crying. And finally we got to the apartment building, and she was like, "Are you good?" And I was like, "No." And she was the one that said, "I think you're depressed." And I was like, "Yeah, I think so." Then I got a blessing from the elders, and then we set up an appointment for me to meet the mission president, which was going to be the following P-Day. I talked to one of the mission
couples.
Yeah, one of the older couples, and so this one lady was British, and she was great, and she just told me to make some herbal tea, and so she was really sweet. But so after that, we kind of realized what was going on. Then the following Monday, I talked to my mission president. I think at that point, really, I was like, I think the answer is to go home. But even then, the answer to go home, I felt guilty about that.
Yeah.
Because all the stories that people talk about missions, it's that they stayed, right? They had the courage to stay. So even when it was super hard, or their parent died, or something awful happened while they were on their mission, they loved the Lord enough to stay. And so I think for me, it felt like, well, that's just it's the cop-out, right?
Yeah,
I just want to go home.
Faith? Do I not have enough courage to stay? And
so it was...
That makes me so sad to think of, like, young Beth just, trying... And that's why we have to have this episode.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people in that same experience would feel that.
So it was after I talked to my mission president, then he talked to my parents, and then it was, like, later on Monday or Tuesday, because our P-Day was Monday, I, like, FaceTimed my parents and talked to them. It was kind of funny because my mission president is a wonderful man. He's a very successful businessman. He's Brazilian, but he speaks Spanish, English, and Portuguese, obviously, fluently. So he's just a very successful man. He also has an extremely commanding presence. He walks into the room, and this man deserves respect. And so while I loved him, he was very intimidating to me. Honestly, it was like the worst thing in the world to have to take the train up to his office to say, "Hey, I really am having a hard time."
Totally.
So I remember as I was riding the train that I was kind of like, I can't believe I'm doing this. And even my companion was like, I can't believe you're doing this.
Oh my gosh.
So, it was just heavy. It was a lot. But he was incredibly kind about it. I mean, much kinder than I think I even expected. He talked about how, he had a child that struggled with it, and so he knew that it was very real. And so when he talked to my parents, he basically was like, you do not get to make this decision for her, and you're not going to make her feel guilty about it. And
yay for your mission president.
Yeah, I mean, so he...
Not that I think your parents would make you feel guilty.
But, I mean, but there could be people that have that situation.
Absolutely.
I think he said that there was someone where they were talking to their parents, and their parents were kind of like, you need to stop wasting people's time and, like, get it together. And he hung up the phone on their parents.
Oh, my gosh. I love that. Yeah,
which was crazy. But so he just, I think, wanted to be like, this is her decision. And so, again, obviously my parents knew. I don't think I mentioned this before, but this was kind of a big thing. So before I decided to go home, I think it says in the handbook, you're not supposed to talk negatively about your mission, right? In like letters home and things like that.
Does it? It might have.
I feel like it did.
Yeah.
At least to some respect, it said that. And so I really wasn't telling anyone how I was feeling. I could barely admit it to myself, let alone write home. So it definitely wasn't in my big group emails that I was sending to people.
No, of course.
Because I had all these friends on mission saying how much they loved the mission, and I didn't want to be like, yeah, actually, I'm having a really hard time. Which honestly, now that you look back, you realize, oh, everyone was having a hard time, just no one said it.
No, literally. I'm curious, when I responded to you, was I like, oh, it's the best?
No.
Okay, good.
Honestly, I don't think any of my friends that were on missions did. I think everyone kind of was like, listen, I get it.
Yeah.
And so I hadn't told anyone, but I hadn't even told my family. And so even though I'm really close to my mom and my siblings, I could barely admit it to myself, let alone to them. Plus, when you're riding home on P-Day, the stuff is past. And you just had a good P-Day. You've relaxed. And so all these things that were difficult are kind of over. Yeah. And you can kind of joke about it. You're in the best
place.
Yeah. And so instead of being like, oh my goodness, this week was just absolutely awful and I just had the worst experience, you're just kind of like, yeah, like it was rough, but here's to a new week. Mm-hmm. So I really hadn't talked to anyone about it. And so when I first wrote, it wasn't until after I talked to my mission president that I told my mom. It was like that day I went home and we were doing our emails, and I said, hey, love you, don't have much time, but just so you know, I might be coming home. My poor mom was like, I think automatically she goes into, oh my goodness, Bethany's having a hard time.
I need to help her.
Everyone pray for Bethany that she'll stay, because this will kill her if she comes home. She'll always feel like she's a failure and things like that. So, like I said, I hadn't written anyone, and so finally one day, maybe the week that before I talked to my mission president, but around that time, I just kind of exploded and wrote it all down in my journal. And just was, I think, even in my journal, I didn't feel like I was very necessarily honest. I'd write that I was struggling, but I'd, be like, this week was hard, but here are 3 things I'm grateful for.
Yeah, I honestly don't think I wrote negatively in my journal either. Or in emails. Like, as you're saying that, I'm like, there had to have been written somewhere, because you almost don't want to put it out there as if it makes it worse.
Even in your journal, because you're like, well, what if my kids read this one day? I don't want them to sit there and think that I was a bad missionary. So there's always this kind of looming feeling of, I don't want people to think I'm a bad missionary. Mm-hmm. But so I just laid it all down in my journal. And that's what I showed to my mission president, because I knew that I couldn't go up to him and say, I'm really depressed and this is how I'm feeling and blah, blah, blah. I knew I would chicken out, I guess. And so I showed him my journal, which looking back, I really can't believe I did that.
That was good for you.
Yeah.
No, that was a smart move.
I think I knew that was the only way that I was going to be honest about it. And so I showed it to him. So then he took it and obviously got my permission to, but he sent it to a mission psychologist who was like over the area, and he sent it to my parents, which I remember realizing that my mom was going to read those pages, and it really broke my heart, because you don't want your mom to realize the dark space that you're in. You don't realize, you don't really want to admit to anyone how broken and how lost and scared you feel, but especially you don't want to hurt anyone else with it.
Yeah, you're worried
and so
to put that weight.
Yeah. So it broke my heart to know that she was going to read it, but it ended up being a blessing because when she read it, I think all of the things that people would normally say to a struggling missionary, like, hey, you don't have to be perfect. It's okay. And just make sure that you're, doing things that get rid of some stress or things like that. So usually the things that you would say to a missionary that's struggling, I knew those things. And that's what I had written down in my journal, was like, I know these things. I know I have a great life. I know I don't have to be perfect. But all of these things do not change the fact that I feel awful all the time. I was reading the pages that I wrote, and I talked several times about how I just constantly felt like I wanted to scream. And I would like clench my hands so tightly to just keep me from crying in the middle of, a dinner with the members or things like that, but I just was I felt like I was constantly on the verge of tears, constantly on the verge of just kind of like a meltdown.
Yeah.
And it was just like this constant knot in my stomach that just never went away for 5 months. I think by reading that helped my mom be like, oh, this is not only just, regular mission stress. There is something very wrong. This is not Bethany. This is a very serious problem. And so I think that really helped her be like, oh, she may really need to come home. Like that may be the answer for her. And so that helped too, because then when she and I talked, she knew really the frame of mind that I was in without me having to say it. Because again, it's hard to say to your mom, yeah, Mom, I feel like I'm worthless. And
especially if your emotions are already up here.
Yeah.
You're not going to even be able to get it out.
No. And so it helped that for her to be able to read that ahead of time.
No, and I think that's an important thing that everyone needs to acknowledge is like mental illness is a very real thing.
Yeah.
And I think our generation is making strides in helping some of the older generation be like, hey, no, this is real. It's not your life is good. Like say more prayers and be grateful for what you have. No, there can be imbalances that need to be addressed.
Yeah.
And things that need to happen in order for you to get better.
Yeah.
And the mission field isn't the place for you to be doing those things.
No. And that's what I think one thing that I can't remember if it was the mission psychologist that said this to me or the therapist that I saw when I came home, but she was like, imagine that you have broken your leg. If you have a broken leg, you're not going to just say, well, get over it. And that's what you really have to think about with depression and anxiety, is that there is something in your brain that is broken.
Yeah.
And so it really was figuring out, okay, either way I have to heal from this. So is that possible in the mission field, or do I need to go home? For me, I think I realized there's no way that I can get better in the mission field. That is my problem, is this incredibly stressful environment. I have to leave this environment in order to be able to recover. So I think some people can figure it out. If you can get on the right medicine and talk to a mission psychologist, or maybe, you get to talk to your parents more than you normally would be able to, that may help you and enable you to stay.
There's different severities of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, each circumstance needs to be met
like
individually. But we're at the point of the story where you go home.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about yourself? What are those
awful
thoughts?
Again, I think as soon as I decided to go home, there was a sense of relief, obviously, because it's going to be over.
Yeah.
But but then all of those feelings that you were afraid of feeling like a failure and feeling like, I don't know, you've lost yourself, that follows you home. So even though you're out of that super stressful environment, you're still depressed, you're still anxious. And if anything, I remember my therapist said, your nerve endings are beyond fried. Like, you've been in a fight or flight mode for 5 months. So your body does not even know what way is up at this point. And so I remember, I came home and I felt like an absolute shell of myself because I wasn't my normal self. Even when I saw my mom in the airport when she came out to get me, I was happy to see her, but I knew I wasn't as happy as I should have been. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you could still tell it wasn't there.
There were things in me that were very much missing. And so, I came home and I felt honestly just kind of like a shell of myself. I felt pretty dead inside about everything. So, yes, I was relieved to be home, But I did not want, I mean, I came home and I immediately explained to my family what I had gone through. I sat everyone down and I was like, listen, this is what happened. This is why I'm home. So that I don't know, people understood that I didn't just say, darn, this was really tough.
No, of course. You don't want to be misunderstood or have people make assumptions. So I would rather tell them exactly what happened.
And I think that helped them too, then they knew where I was. But, I mean, yeah, I didn't like to leave the house. I really did not want people to have expectations of me at all, because that's all a mission is, right? You have all of these expectations of how you should be as a missionary, down to the fact that you shouldn't even be sitting on the bus without talking to somebody. So I think for me, I felt suffocated by that feeling of I have to be constantly on. I always have to be ready to talk to people, always have to be ready to teach the gospel. I never felt like I could really get a break from that. Or if I wasn't talking to people, I felt guilty about it. And so when I got home, I mean, I did not want really to have anything scheduled. And I didn't want anyone to expect anything of me. And so I would say my family was really good about, I mean, it was Christmas time. And so that's when a lot of family parties and things are. And my mom would say, do you want to go? And I think, before she would have kind of been like, okay, you need to go and talk to people about it, whatever. But I was like, nope. And she'd say, okay.
Yeah.
And so I just, and when I did have to be somewhere, I mean, that was really hard for me. So how some people come home from their missions and they keep using the mission calendar and they want every minute scheduled out. I was the opposite. I did not want anything scheduled for me. I just wanted to be able to just be. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to do that for a while, which helped me a lot. But I didn't really want to talk necessarily about what had happened. I wasn't opposed to it, but at the same time, it's really hard to admit to people that you came home early. So.
And people don't know what to say in those situations. No. Were there any things that people did say that were like, this is what not to say?
I will say I was very lucky because I feel like my ward, my family, my friends, everyone was incredibly supportive. I remember one time, church was so stressful to me because by the end of my mission, I could barely read the scriptures without feeling guilty. So I didn't want to read the scriptures because it's all these missionaries who are giving up everything for the work. And so I was like, well, that's not me. I could barely pray because I felt like God was mad at me for being a bad missionary. So I didn't know what to say to him, which is part of the problem too. You just feel like God's mad at you.
Of course. Which he would.
Do you remember in school learning about it was the early American book or thing called Sinners in the Eyes of an Angry God? It was a Puritan thing. That is what I felt like. I felt like God was just done with me, was mad at me, did not, because I had failed him.
This is shocking to me, honestly.
Oh, yeah, no.
Because I feel like I knew your testimony before you went on a mission.
Yeah, no, but that was part of the problem. I felt so alone to the point that I didn't feel like, even that God wanted me anymore, that I had failed him. And so, I didn't want to pray. I didn't know what to say. I was kind of like, I want to go home. I hope you're okay with that. Don't turn me into a pillar of salt, please.
And then reality, he's like, please go home.
Yes, because
go get the help that you need.
This is actually something I learned afterward. Part of the problem when you're really depressed and anxious is those feelings are so overwhelming that you cannot feel the Spirit. And so that was part of the cycle for me on my mission that was really difficult, was that, I couldn't feel the Spirit. And so what do you do when you can't feel the Spirit? You pray, you read your scriptures, you try to, lose yourself in the gospel more. But the more I did that,
the more guilt,
the more
anxiety,
awful I felt. And so I never was really feeling the Spirit. And so I thought that it was, again, that me being a super disobedient missionary, which it's not even like I was really being very it's not like I was being...
You weren't being disobedient.
No,
Let me be clear.
I wasn't being flagrantly
home.
Disobedient.
Yeah.
But I was sitting there thinking, well, the reason I can't feel the Spirit is because, God has withdrawn himself from me. And that was something that I learned after my mission. Those feelings are so overwhelming that they block out the Spirit. The Spirit is soft. It's the still small voice. And especially when you are incredibly depressed and anxious, the voices in your head and those emotions are so loud that you can't really feel anything else. And so I wish I had understood that on my mission, that just because I can't feel the Spirit doesn't mean that God doesn't love me. It just is that these other things are so overwhelming that it's kind of blocking that out. But so because I couldn't feel the Spirit, I just figured, again, God had forsaken me. And so I didn't want to pray because I didn't want to be in trouble. And I didn't really want to go to church because I would just feel guilty. And I still went to church, but I remember one of my first Sundays back, it was a combined Relief Society and Elders Quorum lesson. And they were going to do a mission thing where they were going to have the recently returned missionaries lead discussions. And I walked into the room and kind of realized what was happening. I was with my sisters, and I just looked at them and said, no. And I walked out and I walked home. And that was okay. Again, I think at the time I felt guilty, man, I can't even sit through church. But I think part of the recovery process of things like that is being willing to say, you know what? Today I can't do it. Maybe one day I can, and maybe the next day I can't. Some days maybe I could just make it through sacrament meeting and then I needed to go home.
I think that's actually such good advice. And I think we need to remember what you were just saying was so valuable, is the Spirit can't even be there if your anxiety, your depression, your mental health isn't in a place that it can penetrate through. So in my opinion, you obviously need to resolve what's going on in your head before you can then start making the steps to have the Spirit back into your life. So how'd you recover?
I mean, it was all incredibly gradual. I think after I came home, I could immediately look back and say, okay, even though I couldn't feel the Spirit, things were happening behind the scenes that showed me that God was aware of me. When all of this was happening, the timing was actually not great, because right when the 2 weeks after I talked to my mission, it was 2 weeks after I talked to him before I came home, which were the longest 2 weeks of my entire life. Even though I knew I was going home, that almost made it worse.
Yeah, because you're about to face the reality.
Those days felt excruciatingly long because I couldn't go outside without having a panic attack. So, I mean, my companion and I are stuck inside, which I feel guilty about, that we're not going out and doing stuff. And I feel bad for her because she's toward the end of her mission and doesn't want to spend every day with this, sad little cucumber of her trainee. But also the thought of going outside. I mean, I literally physically could not handle it. But at the same time, my mission president's son was getting married in Spain. And so he had gotten permission to leave the mission to go to, because there wasn't a temple in Portugal at the time. So he got to go to the Madrid temple with his family for that sealing. So he was busy with family that was in the country and literally left the country for a little bit. But even when he was so busy, he would still call and check in on me, if not every day, at least every other day. And he would talk to me and talk to my companion. And I remember one time just saying, thank you for, I know that you have a lot going on, so thank you for taking the time to do this for me. And he just said, you are worth every minute of my time, which was just, I think, the kindest thing that he could have said. So I could see that the Lord loved me through the companion that I had, the mission president that I had, and also I think the worst day of all for me was probably the day before my mom came, because I didn't know when I was going home yet. So I didn't know if it was going to be tomorrow or if it was going to be 2 weeks from now. And the thought of waiting 2 more weeks, I mean, I wanted to scream, because the thought of dealing with all of these feelings, I just couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take feeling like that anymore. And so that was probably the darkest day, was just, and I just remember I just laid there in my bed and I was like, listen, Heavenly Father, something needs to happen, and it needs to happen right now, because otherwise I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll do pretty much anything to stop feeling this way. And I'm just laying there in my bed, and all of a sudden I hear our phone ring, and my companion answers it, and I can't hear what she's saying on the phone, but I remember I kind of was like, does it work that quickly? And she came into my room, and our room, and sat on my bed and said, She was like, I don't want you to get up, but that was the mission president, and your mom is on her way to Portugal to come get you. And I mean, it was like a ray of sunshine in like the gloomiest day, because I'm very close with my mom, and so A, there was an end in sight, and B, my mom was going to be there. And so
total miracle.
Yeah. And so then I realized, again, here I am feeling at my absolute lowest, and while the Lord can't necessarily make me feel his love, he is doing all of these things to make it happen, so that the person I need the most is coming to Portugal to get me, and that I can go home and be okay. So
the truths in this, what you're sharing, are just like hitting me so hard. It's so beautiful.
So again, I knew God loved me, but still, like, when I got home, I still felt like I'd failed him. Again, the scriptures are full of mission stories, and here I was, they don't talk about the missionaries that couldn't hack it. So, and that's kind of how I felt. Like, I guess I just couldn't handle it. Like, all of these, my friends can handle the pressure, and I can't. And so it really started with just the tiniest steps. My prayers were like, Heavenly Father, thank you for these 2 good things that happened today. The end. That's all I could say. And if I read the scriptures, it was like one scripture. And then slowly over time, that became easier and easier. And it took a long time. It took months and months and months for me to get to the point where I could pray fully, open my heart fully to the Lord again. And before I could read the scriptures comfortably without feeling this enormous sense of guilt. So, it was really just baby steps over a very long period of time. And because I think in some ways I needed to take a break from these things that were making me feel so bad. And it sounds bad to kind of be like, I need to take a break from the scriptures. But
it makes sense
to
me.
And I think I had to just not feel guilty about it and not be like, I know that the scriptures are a good thing, but I just can't do that part right now. It
weighed onto you as this guilt.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you saw it as like sin. Like, I feel like you thought you saw this as shame. And I think we see a similar pattern in people when they do actually sin, pulling away from the gospel. But it's just, it wasn't. And how did you change that perspective of like, me coming home early is not a problem. Me coming home early is not a sin.
Honestly, I think it was talking about it. I feel like the way I process things in general is talking about it. And so I feel like I just talked and talked and talked and talked about it, which is really hard for some people to do. And it wasn't easy for me to do either. But that was the way that it almost was like exposure therapy. That the more I said it, the more it was like, okay, it is what it is. So especially when I went back to school the following fall, I remember kind of watching people do the mental math. When they'd ask if I went on a mission, I'd say yes. And so I told them when I went, and they'd kind of like, I could see them like trying to figure out, wait a minute.
Did you avoid like telling people how long you'd been out?
Yes. So if I could, I would avoid things like that. But it became easier once the people that I had gone out with were coming home, because then no one's asking questions. Yeah. But again, I think it took a long time for me to be able to say I came home from my mission without feeling ashamed. And not that I knew I had made the right choice. I knew that even when I was in a good place with the Lord, like, I knew that it was the right decision. But I think there's always kind of that people don't necessarily get that. And so I just don't think you want to deal with the judgments that people may have, or even necessarily the questions. You don't really want to say, I was majorly depressed. Yeah. So, I came home. Yeah. I remember someone came up to me and legit asked me, like, why are you home so early? And I just was kind of like, ooh, and wanted to get out of that situation as fast as humanly possible.
So that's not something to say to someone who goes
Don't say, why did you come home? Because there are many reasons why you could come home.
I know.
But I think what was especially hard for me, I knew 2 people that had come home early at the time. None of my friends were coming home early. And I think there was kind of a perception of people. I even remember someone in my mission saying, they heard that one of their friends came home early. for depression, and they kind of just said, I think depression's just something you kind of get over. Like, you just have to decide to get over it.
That is definitely a perception that people have.
Yeah. And so I think people just think that you just kind of are just being sad.
Yeah, and they also think like, oh, it's an excuse to go home.
Yeah. Or, really, if you could just think positively, you'd get through it. And I think that's something that you don't realize. It's that you literally cannot. And all of those things. Totally. Again, I have much to be grateful for. I have a wonderful family. I have a wonderful home. My life is so much better than a lot of people's lives.
Yep.
I have so much to be grateful for. And yet, I feel this way.
Yep.
So they're really, you cannot think yourself out of it. So yeah, don't say that to somebody. Don't ask them necessarily why they came home, and don't tell them, why couldn't you just figure it out?
Yeah.
But like I said, I didn't know anyone really that had come home early. And as awful as my experience was, I didn't want anyone else to have to go through it. And so if I could help other people in any way, I wanted to be able to do that. Whether it was by, when I came home, I gave a homecoming speech. But my homecoming speech was, that Hugh B. Brown story, the currant bush, the Lord cutting down. That's what I talked about. And I said, that is what has happened to me.
Yeah.
My life, I had this vision of this great thing, of a mission, of serving for 18 months. And that's a great thing. And that's what I thought my plan was. That's what I thought the Lord's plan was. And apparently, that's not the plan. And that how much that hurts, how much it's so confusing, because you're kind of like, hello, this is such a good thing. And I'm trying so hard to, sacrifice. And so why is this what's happening to me? And so that's what I ended up, how missionaries do like rotations in their stake after they come home, how different you end up speaking in different wards.
Yep.
I gave that talk, 7 times. And every time it was awful, because again, I had to get up in front of all these people, most of whom knew me and knew, when I was going on my mission, it was, oh my goodness, you're going to be so great. You're already so great. And you're just going to be the best missionary ever.
You're incredible.
And so then you're like, well, apparently not. And now I'm letting all of you down too, because you all had such high hopes for me. And so I had to get up and say in front of all these people over and over and over again, yeah, I came home early, and here I am, feeling like that little currant bush saying, hello, why did you do this to me? But every time I gave that talk, somebody would come up to me and say, thank you for saying this. My daughter came home, or, I came home and this just really helped me. And so knowing that my experience was kind of helping other people with theirs was like the saving grace of it all.
Yeah, the silver lining that you had.
There were like a couple friends I had that were either struggling on their mission or ended up coming home that I was then able to relate to and talk to. And I just was grateful that I had an idea of what to say to them and how I could maybe help them. So
when did you feel like Beth again?
I think you kind of wait for a day where you look in the mirror and you're like, there I am.
Yeah.
That's me again. And it doesn't happen like that. You also kind of wait. You think that maybe one day it's just like,
a switch.
I'm not depressed anymore. Yay. But it's not like that. So I ended up taking medicine when I came home, and I still take medicine, 6 years later. So for some people it's a short-term thing, and for some people it's a long-term thing. And for me, it's been a long-term thing. But that honestly made a huge difference for me. I felt like for me, my medicine enabled me to be myself. And instead of sitting at like this kind of, if like you think of happiness on a scale of 0 to 10, instead of sitting at maybe like a 3, where like normal is a 5, I felt like I was always kind of sitting at a 3. So I'm happy, but also kind of sad all the time. I felt like it brought me up to a 5. So I could experience normal levels of happiness and sadness. So it didn't get rid of the sadness, but it normalized it all.
Well, and it's not like you can put this behind you and act like it never happened.
No.
It's not like you're ever going to go back to the girl that you were before your mission, because now you've experienced this hard, traumatic experience.
But things that were so sad weren't quite so sad anymore, or I could at least deal with it. And I think a lot of the times the thing with depression is the things that would make you feel better, you can't even do them. Like, you don't even have the motivation to do those things. So exercising or I came home and all of the things that I love to do, baking.
Yeah, you lose all of that interest.
All of that I did not want to do. I didn't want to listen to music. I didn't want to watch movies. I didn't want to do anything. And so I think for me, being on medicine and like going to therapy and that kind of stuff enabled me to at least have the motivation to do the things that would allow me to be happy again. So as far as how long it took me to feel like Beth, it probably took, I don't know if I really felt like myself until like the next fall when I was at school.
So about a year?
Yeah, like probably like 7-8 months.
Yeah.
So, and again, it wasn't like one day I was like,
no, of
here
course.
I am.
And
but
maybe it was a bad question.
No, it's not a bad question, because you sit and kind of wait for it. You want to know, how long is it going to take? But it does just, it comes so gradually. And I think it's like, it's once you look back and you're like, oh, I don't feel like crying every day anymore. And these things that I used to love to do, I love to do again. Or there are other things that I love to do now. So it's almost imperceptible until you look back and realize, oh, I'm not where I used to be. I don't feel like that anymore.
Man, it's all so good. You're also so eloquent.
Oh, man.
You've done a perfect job. But what advice would you give to a missionary maybe struggling? It's hard because missionaries struggle for so many different reasons.
It's true. But I think at least the feelings of inadequacy are pretty universal.
Yep.
I think most of the time, if you're on your mission thinking, oh my goodness, I'm just an amazing missionary, I don't know of anyone who feels that way. And so I think those feelings of inadequacy are really universal. And so there were, like, with friends or family members that served after I did who were struggling at the beginning of their mission, or just to people before they would go, the thing that I would always just say is, again, kind of what I said before, the only person that you are supposed to be is you. One of my good friends, they're setting apart, said that I got to be there when they were set apart, and I loved that in their blessing it said, the only shoes that you are required to fill are your own. And I loved that because, again, you're not supposed to be your trainer. You're not supposed to be Elder Holland on his mission. You're supposed to be you. And there are things that you have experienced in your life that are why you are here in this area or with this companion or things like that. So you are not expected to be this perfect cookie cutter missionary. And I would try to remind them, again, what you are doing is insane. Not insane in a bad way, but it is incredible that you are leaving your education, your family, your friends, your life behind you in order to try to help other people.
Yep.
And that is enough. So even if you, don't love the mission, it's okay. There is something, I think, in the mission where the way that people talk about it, it feels like this 18 to 24 months of your life will determine the rest of your life. If you're a good missionary, the rest of your life is going to be good. If you're a bad missionary and make mistakes or get sent home early or whatever, then you're going to regret it for the rest of your life. And, it's always going to be this dark memory. And that's not how the plan of salvation works. Even if you were
Horrible.
A very disobedient missionary, you can repent. And that's the whole thing about repentance, is that you should be able to look back and maybe you can regret choices that you made, but it's not going to be this lifelong guilt.
Yeah, that's so good.
Also, your mission ends up being a very short amount of time in a very long life. And you're still very young. Really, your brain's not even fully developed yet.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of room for mistake. And even now, where we are, it's 6 years later, that feels forever ago. So much has happened in our lives. So much has changed. And so you can set up good patterns in your mission, and it can be an influential thing of your life, but it should not be this thing that determines the rest of your life.
Yep.
And so I try to remind them of that.
It's good advice, especially because there's so many members who don't go on a mission. So what message are you telling them if they don't go on a mission? Are they setting their life up for
And that's
failure?
a different discussion where I feel like people say, girls don't have to go on a mission, but really, you probably should.
No.
Which I never appreciated because I feel like that's really unfair. Also, again, I'm very much if you do not feel, now especially more than even when I went on my mission, I am very much if you do not feel like you should be on a mission, do not go.
Yeah.
Because it is hard enough when you know that you're supposed to be there and you can think, you know what?
Absolutely.
I can go back to this moment that I remember I was supposed to be here, or I felt like this was right. So if you never really wanted to be there and you're out in, the boonies of Australia feeling super sad, that's really hard to stay when you don't feel like you're supposed to be there.
Mm-hmm. I talked about this on my episode with my husband just a couple weeks ago, but it's like our heavenly parents don't want us to just take it as hard and be like, okay, tough up. Like, this needs to be okay. No, they understand that this is going to be hard, and they're not angry at you for feeling that it's hard.
No.
Like that hurts me that was the perception for so long.
Yeah.
And I just want that to be so clear that I just look at my children. We just taught Bowie how to ride a bike. And he was so excited about this opportunity. He thinks it's going to be the best. He sees older kids doing it, and he's like, that's what I want to be able to do.
Yeah.
But it was a disaster the first time. It took us quite a few days until we got to the place where now he enjoys and loves riding his bike. But it's not like I looked at him as a parent and was like,
could you get it together, please?
You really blew it today.
Yeah.
You were exciting, and I expected you to learn and pick this up. Like, I don't know. I just think something even as big as the mission, they don't look at you and think like disappointment in your decision to come home. And if anything, you fulfilled the purpose that you were meant to.
Yeah. Well, and it's like I said before, I think sometimes you think the answer is the right answer is not going to be to go home, but that's not true. And again, even though I couldn't feel the spirit and I didn't feel like, I was getting this super warm feeling, you need to go home. You can trust yourself. And if you are sincerely feeling like, I don't think I can do this here, and the answer is to go home, that takes as much faith as it does to stay. Yep. Because you are going to go home and people are not going to understand that.
Yep.
I was telling you before, I remember a lot of people when I came home were very much like, I get it. My mission was super hard. Like, I wanted to go home. I'm surprised I didn't go home. And there was a couple people that said, shared the stories of how they served these people who then, because they were baptized, then they, 4 more people got baptized, and suddenly thousands of people are baptized, and that's why we serve, which is true. And those stories are very true. And there is a profound, obviously, influence from missionaries. There's a reason why we do missionary work.
Yes.
But that's not the only example of faith to stay. Sometimes the example of faith is to go home.
I love that.
And it's
like the example of the faith not to be healed.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have the faith not to be healed? Which was, do you have the faith to go home from your mission? And to not be able to say, I served an 18-month mission. My mission was 5 months. But, you talked about your children not being disappointed in them. And I remember one time there was a person that I was going to get married to, and everything was going great, and then it didn't work out, and I was just beyond devastated. And I got a blessing, and one of the things that was said in the blessing was, your heavenly parents weep with you and for you. And I remember that really took me aback, because I was like, well, why would they be sad about it? Because if anyone knows that it's going to be okay, it's them. But how amazing is that because they love us so much, that even though they know that it's going to be okay, that you're going to find a different person, or that things will work out however they work out,
perspective,
that they still, it makes them weep that you are devastated. And that's how you feel about your own children. Again, just because I know that Penelope is going to be okay, because, I don't know, we are letting her take a nap when she doesn't want to, it still breaks my heart that she is sad about it, and that she feels so upset. And that's how they feel about us. And one of the things that you had asked me before that I thought a lot about is, would I encourage my children to go on missions? And that's a really interesting question, because that's like, for me, it's like saying, would I want my kids to go and potentially experience what was the worst experience of my life? And that's hard to be like, yeah, go ahead, go on, go experience that. Hopefully it turns out well for you. But I also recognize that my experience is not everyone's experience. For some people, the mission is great. It gives them a sense of purpose. They find themselves on the mission. Just because that's not what it was for me doesn't mean that it can't be for other people. Yeah. Because I know people who, again, the mission was still really hard, but they made the friends that they needed to. They learned the responsibility, the structure, leadership, all of these things that they needed to learn. They learned it on the mission. And so it can be great. That's just not the lesson that I learned, and that's okay. And so I definitely don't feel like I would pressure anyone, and especially not my children, to go on a mission.
Yep.
Even if it's my son. We still have the expectation that young men should serve a mission. Yep. But if I have a son that says, I don't want to go, or I'm not really sure, I would not say, no, you should go.
Yep.
Because, again, it's hard enough when you want to be there. And so I think if they were wrestling with it, I would try to help them figure it out. But if they said, I don't want to go, I'm not going to say, well, too bad, go.
Yep.
And then especially like with a daughter too, it's the same thing. It's totally her decision, and I wouldn't pressure her either way. If she chooses to go, and same like with the son, if they choose to go, I will just do everything I can to prepare them, to help them find other outlets for stress, because before and after your mission, you can listen to music, you can go for a run, you can talk with friends, you have all of these outlets for stress that do not exist in the mission, which is really hard. So I would work to help them figure out ways to deal with that, help them recognize what's normal stress and anxiety, what's not normal. When do you need to be reaching out to people? And also just making sure that they understand that you can be honest about what your mission is like. If it's awful, at least to your parents or to your friends, you can tell me.
Yep.
Because there's no reason that you have to suffer through that alone. And that's what, looking back, I don't know if it necessarily would have changed whether or not I came home from my mission, but it would have made a big difference if I had, just been willing to talk to my parents and my siblings and been like, this is, I'm dying. This is A, B, or C of what I'm experiencing. And this week was really hard because of this. And they could say, oh yeah, I get that. And that's what I was like for me. And I think knowing that other people experienced that and having their support and not feeling so alone because I couldn't tell anyone would have made a big difference for me. So I think with the child, I just would do everything I could to prepare them for it.
That's so good. I think that's such good advice.
Yeah.
Prepare them for it. And recognizing that their experience is not going to be exactly as your experience was.
You just say, I hope it's better for you than it was for me. And
exactly.
For my kids, obviously, I hope it's leaps and bounds better for them than it was for me.
But also it's okay if you don't want to go.
But yeah, and if you come home, that's okay too.
Yes.
And I think, it's interesting because I wonder if it will be hard to explain, oh yeah, I came home early for my mission. Because even now, I'm not ashamed to say it, and I'm not necessarily embarrassed.
It's gotten better.
But it's still awkward.
Yeah.
To bring that up sometimes. And again, the more I said it to people, the easier it got. The more, it's that kind of exposure therapy of just saying, I came home early. And just the more you say it, the less I feel like I was afraid to say it. And, but it still is, it's not like when I'm introducing myself, I'm like, came home from my mission early. And when people ask if I served a mission, I just say yes.
Yeah.
I don't say I came home. I don't say my fast track 5-month mission. But it's still hard to talk about, but it's definitely, I don't feel ashamed anymore. And so that's what I would want other people that came home, and especially my family members, to not feel ashamed. Because again, you're not guilt tripping someone for breaking their leg or having, shoulder surgery. Yeah. So why would you make people feel bad because their brain couldn't function properly?
Yeah. Or any reason you come home. They do come home for the
Even
broken legs.
Come home for anything.
Yeah.
It's that you shouldn't
sins
feel ashamed.
that you need to get over. Yeah. Honestly, I think that I agree where I want to just tell my children, it's okay if you come home early. I think that needs to kind of be something that we just are used to saying to missionaries. Yeah. Is hey, these are the reasons why you might come home early. And
it's all okay.
We're here for you whenever you do.
Yeah.
Well, friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you so much for giving it a listen. And thank you so much to Beth for being vulnerable and willing to have this conversation with me. If you have a minute, go ahead and leave a review. Your reviews mean so much to me and seriously help me. When I'm having a bad day, I just go read reviews. So please leave a review. It helps me out big time. And I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.